Karol Nawrocki was sworn in as the president of Poland, marking the start of his 5-year term. What is the president's agenda and how is it going to shape the domestic and foreign course of Poland in the coming years? Aleks Szczerbiak, professor of political science at the University of Sussex, joins me on World News Tonight to discuss what the new president has in store. Professor, thank you so much for joining. It's great to have you back on the show.
It's great to be back. Good evening.
Good evening. So let's start with President Nawrocki's address at the Polish Parliament. What is your opinion? What, in your opinion, are the most important takeaways from what we heard this morning? And what are some of the most important points on his agenda that he outlined?
I think it's clear that he sees his mission very much as trying to put the government on the back foot. He's going to be much less conciliatory than his predecessor, Andrzej Duda. Although Andrzej Duda was often described as a very partisan president, a notary, he did actually on occasions try and find a common cooperation platform with his political opponents. He often talked about what he called a coalition of Polish affairs. Karol Nawrocki is very different. He's much more combative. He doesn't believe that trying to find this kind of common platform with his political opponents is a fruitful way to go. And I think he sees his project as very much trying to confront, to destabilize the Tusk administration, to put it on the back foot, and eventually to hopefully prompt early elections. And in that election, a coalition of right-wing forces that supported him for the presidency would come to power.
And do you think that this sort of a lack of cohabitation between the newly sworn-in president and the government is going to be productive for Poland? What's your opinion?
Well, he's got to be a bit careful because if he just opposes everything that the government does wholesale, then the government can turn around and say that the reason that it's not making any progress, and the government has been very much criticised for failing to keep its election promises, for not really having a very effective, positive programme for governing, the government can then blame Mr. Nawrocki for its shortcomings. It can say that it's blockages by the president that's actually causing the fact that it can't implement its programme. And in many ways, this is the government's best hope, really. It's very unpopular. It's very much on the back foot. And I think that if he's not careful, if he's too confrontational, if he's not strategic and focused in the issues that he chooses to block the government's support on, he could actually provide the government with a narrative that they can use going into the next election. And Mr. Tusk, Donald Tusk, the Prime Minister, is always at his happiest when he's in a situation of political polarisation and confrontation. So Mr. Nawrocki might want to put the government on the back foot and might want to oppose everything it does, but he's got to be careful, he's got to be quite nuanced, he's got to be quite strategic, so he doesn't simply portrayed as a blocking president.
I think the confrontation could be possibly the name of the game for both sides. But you mentioned before that former President Andrzej Duda, in a way, refrained from pursuing more power. With President Nawrocki, we see that he might actually aim to turn the negative power into positive power, meaning that he would have a greater say in the decision-making process. Do you think that this is possible? And what would actually have to happen in terms of legislation for the president to have more power?
Well, the Polish constitution doesn't give the president positive instruments in terms of promoting a policy agenda. It gives him very considerable powers, but they're negative powers. There, as you said, it's a legislative veto, which the current government doesn't have a majority to overturn. He can also refer legislation to the Constitutional Tribunal before it comes into force. But his ability to pursue a positive agenda is very, very limited in terms of his constitutional powers. But what he does have, and it's something that Andrzej Duda didn't have at the tail end of his presidency, is he has a mandate. He has a huge electoral mandate, the largest ever turnout in a Polish presidential election, and an election that he very much framed as a vote of no confidence in the government. And that's widely how it was interpreted. So what he has, although his constitutional powers are largely negative, an ability to stop the government, is he has momentum. He has the ability to be able to change the dynamics of Polish politics from the fact that he has this huge electoral mandate. And he needs to be quite clever. He needs to promote his agenda in a very clever and strategic way. But he does have that great opportunity, which of course Andrzej Duda didn't have, because by the time the Tusk government came along, he was at the end of his term. He was a lamed up president in many, many ways. Whereas Mr. Nawrocki has this opportunity to put forward this positive agenda.
Let's talk foreign policy, shall we? There are two sides of the same coin. On one hand, we have the relationship with the US, and on the other, we have the relationship with the European Union. Do you think that Mr. Nawrocki, how is he going to actually stir this transatlantic relationship? And do you think that he's going to veer towards the US while leaving the European Union on the sideways? I mean, we've heard during his campaign that there was a certain dose of Euroscepticism.
Yes, that's right. I mean, he is going to prioritize building links with the Trump presidency, with whom he has very good links and very good ties. There's obviously a good personal chemistry between them. But also, as you say, he's a Eurosceptic. He's what you might call a soft Eurosceptic. He's not somebody who wants Poland to leave the EU. Pole exit is not on his agenda at all. But he wants to oppose deeper European integration and protects what he sees as Polish sovereignty in a number of key areas, on things like climate policy, on things like migration, on Poland retaining its own currency. He made it very clear he was strongly opposed to Polish accession to the Eurozone. And in relation to transatlantic relations, he is very much opposed to the EU developing a defence identity separately from the transatlantic alliance. This is something that the government, I think, would have, had Mr. Nawrocki not been elected, would have moved much more enthusiastically on. It would have been much keener on developing Europe as a separate defence power, if you like, a separate defence identity. But I think Mr. Nawrocki's victory has made this much, much more difficult. And I think that given that he's Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces, given that he convenes the Polish National Security Council, it's in security policy where I think he probably will have the greatest say and the ability to set the agenda the most. And I think this is the key thing he's going to do. He's going to say that the transatlantic, in terms of defence policy, the transatlantic alliance must come first. And while he's in favour of European countries spending more on defence, this cannot be at the expense of transatlantic relations. It can't be as an alternative to the US, because the US is the only credible military security ally that Poland has, according to Mr. Nawrocki.
I mean, Poland is all for good relations with the U.S., but it's also very important to keep a balance when it comes to the unions here in Europe, simply because of the situation that we have happening beyond Poland's eastern border. I wanted to take a moment to touch upon Ukraine and the subject of Mr. Nawrocki's address. He did not mention Ukraine this morning. He's been quite skeptical towards Kyiv in his presidential campaign before. How do you think this relationship between Warsaw and Kyiv is going to be shaped now that Mr. Nawrocki is in office?
So I think the first thing to say is that Karol Nawrocki is not pro-Russian, pro-Putin in any way. I mean, Russia actually has an arrest warrant out against Karol Nawrocki. So he's not somebody who's got any kind of sympathy with the Kremlin. And he's also somebody who will still very much continue to support Ukraine diplomatically, militarily, in terms of providing humanitarian aid. Poland and Ukraine have a common interest in blocking Russian expansionism. And in the case of what's happening in Ukraine, that obviously means Ukraine either winning the war or having a peace settlement on as favourable terms as possible. The difference, I think, with Mr. Nawrocki is that he feels that Poland has not been sufficiently assertive in promoting its interests where those clash with Ukraine's, because although there's an overarching interest in terms of stopping Russia and Russian expansionism, Poland has very different interests, Mr. Nawrocki feels, on things like historical issues or certain economic issues, like, for example, the interests of Polish farmers in competition with Ukrainian farmers. So I think he's going to be much more instrumental. While obviously keeping support for Ukraine, he's going to try and leverage the fact that Ukraine needs Polish military, diplomatic, humanitarian aid to advance Polish interests in those areas where Poland and Ukraine's interests clash.
Very shortly, because we have only but a few seconds left, do you think that Mr. Nawrocki will be able to actually introduce a new constitution by 2030? Your opinion?
The only chance of doing that is if the coalition of forces aligned with him wins the next parliamentary election. And that's unlikely that they will have a constitutional majority, but not completely impossible. And I think that he is the person in Polish politics that's actually capable of brokering that very broad right-wing conservative alliance spanning the Confederation and Law and Justice. It's a very big ask, getting a two-thirds majority in Parliament, and probably very, very unlikely. But if he can act as the sponsor of that broad right-wing conservative coalition, which came together to give him victory in the Polish presidential election, it's not completely impossible.
Definitely an interesting time in the Polish politics. Thank you so much. Aleks Szczerbiak, Professor of Political Science, University of Sussex, was my guest. Thank you so much for joining on the program.
Thank you very much.
And so this would be all for now here on World News Tonight. I'm Klaudia Czerwińska. Please do stay tuned. We're back in just a moment with more news and features.